alone on the road. The boy was fleeing from his stepfather. But when he heard the desperate neigh of that horse, he stopped. And what he saw made him cry. The rain pelted against the trailer's metal roof like angry fists, drowning out most sounds, but not the shattering glass or the bellowed curses that followed. Inside a narrow closet, 13-year-old Jason Miller pressed himself into the corner, his fingers clutching a battered harmonica. Its cool metal surface, worn smooth by years of his father's touch, provided the only comfort in his makeshift sanctuary. "Where are you, you worthless little shit?" Roy's voice slurred through the thin walls, followed by the distinctive crack of another bottle breaking against the kitchen counter. Jason closed his eyes and lifted the harmonica to his lips, drawing a trembling breath before blowing the softest note he could manage. Just loud enough for his own ears, a thread of sound beneath the storm's fury. It was a melody his father had taught him to calm nervous horses, and sometimes it worked on his own racing heart too. 3 weeks ago, that melody hadn't been enough. Roy had found him, dragged him out by the collar, and left 3 cracked ribs as punishment for hiding like a goddamn coward. Jason's side still ached when he breathed too deeply. Thunder crashed outside, momentarily drowning the sounds of destruction in the trailer's main room. Jason reached beside him in the darkness, fingers finding the worn cover of Black Beauty. The book's spine was held together with duct tape, its pages yellowed and dog-eared, the last remnant of his life before his father's death 3 years ago. Before his mother married Roy Denton, before the meth, before the beatings. A heavy thud against the closet door made Jason flinch. He held his breath, pressing the harmonica and book to his chest like talismans. But the door didn't open. Instead, he heard Roy's heavy footsteps staggering away, followed by the trailer's front door slamming. Jason waited 5 more minutes, counting the seconds silently, before easing the closet door open. The living room looked like a war zone, upturned furniture, shattered glass, and a small blood smear on the wall, where Roy had likely cut himself in his rage. His mother lay unconscious on the couch, her thin arm hanging limply over the edge, fingers still loosely curled around an empty pill bottle. It wasn't the first time Jason had found her this way, but something felt different. The stillness in her chest lasted too long between shallow breaths. "Mom?" he whispered, approaching cautiously. When she didn't respond, he pressed 2 fingers against her neck the way his father had taught him to check a horse's pulse, gentle but firm. The heartbeat was there, but faint and irregular. Jason's decision crystallized in that moment. He couldn't stay, not anymore. He moved quickly, pulling his backpack from under his bed. Into it went Black Beauty, the harmonica, a change of clothes, and the $43 he'd saved from odd jobs around the neighborhood. In the bathroom, he caught his reflection in the cracked mirror. Thin face, eyes too old for a 13-year-old, a fading yellow bruise on his left cheekbone. Before leaving, he dialed 911 from the trailer's landline, whispered his address, and said only, "My mom won't wake up," before hanging up. Then he slipped out into the rain, hood pulled low over his face. The Highway 54 stretched ahead of him like a wet ribbon under the stormy Kansas sky. Jason walked with his thumb out whenever headlights approached, but cars sped past, spraying him with roadside puddles. After 3 hours, his jeans were soaked through, his teeth chattering as the night grew colder. 200 miles away, Warren Blackwood leaned back in his leather chair, boots propped on his mahogany desk, phone pressed to his ear. The wall behind him displayed framed photographs of prize-winning horses, oil wells, and Blackwood shaking hands with 2 different presidents. "100,000 is my final offer, Davidson," he said, twirling a silver letter opener between his fingers. "You and I both know the Appaloosa market hasn't recovered from last year's drought." The voice on the other end protested weakly. "Listen," Blackwood continued, a smile spreading beneath his perfectly trimmed mustache. "I've seen 30 photographs and 3 videos of this horse. He's magnificent, no argument there. But you've had him for sale for 4 months with no takers. I'm offering cash, immediate transfer." He paused, letting the silence work for him. "Unless you'd prefer to keep feeding that 1,000-pound investment through winter." 5 minutes later, Blackwood ended the call with a satisfied chuckle. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Melissa, contact Bobby. Tell him we're bringing in something special from Kentucky. I just purchased one of the finest Appaloosas in America." The arrival of Thunder at Oak Ridge Farm 3 days later drew a small crowd of stable hands and trainers. The transport trailer backed slowly toward the specialty stall that had been prepared, a reinforced enclosure with premium hardwood panels and state-of-the-art ventilation. "Easy now," called the driver, a weathered man with nervous eyes. "This one's got a temper." Bobby Jenkins, the farm's foreman, stepped forward, his experienced gaze assessing the situation. "Sedated for transport?" "Had to be," the driver confirmed. "Wore off about an hour ago, though. He's been kicking the trailer walls since Wichita." When the trailer's rear door swung open, collective gasps rose from the gathered staff. Even in the dim light, the Appaloosa's coat gleamed, a dramatic pattern of black and white that rippled over powerful muscles. The horse stood at least 16 hands high, his posture tense, ears flattened against his head. "My God," Bobby whispered. "He's magnificent." A handler approached with a lead rope, moving with practiced confidence. Thunder's reaction was instantaneous and violent, rearing up with a terrifying screech, hooves slashing the air inches from the man's face. "Back off!" Bobby shouted. "Everyone clear the area!" It took 3 hours, 4 handlers, and a specialized restraint system to move Thunder from the trailer to his stall. By the time they secured the reinforced door, one man had a broken arm, another a dislocated shoulder, and all wore expressions of defeated exhaustion. Warren Blackwood arrived as the injured were being treated, his immaculate Stetson hat and tailored ranch wear unmarred by the day's labor. He observed Thunder pacing his stall, nostrils flared, eyes wild with primal fear disguised as aggression. "What's the verdict?" he asked Bobby, who was reviewing the transfer paperwork with a grim expression. "Never seen anything like it, sir. Horse has serious issues. The previous handlers claim he was properly trained, then suddenly turned violent 6 months ago. No explanation." Blackwood's face hardened. "I didn't pay 6 figures for a problem horse, Jenkins. We'll work with him, sir. I've called in specialists." "You have 1 month," Blackwood cut in, checking his Rolex. "If he's not saddle-ready by then, we'll recoup our investment by selling him for slaughter. This is a business, not a sanctuary." Bobby's weathered face couldn't quite hide his distaste, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." That night, as rain swept across the Kansas plains again, Jason huddled beneath a large oak tree near a fenced property. His stomach cramped with hunger, the last of his food, a gas station sandwich, consumed hours earlier. He'd walked nearly 20 miles since leaving the trailer, avoiding main roads where police might look for a runaway. The property ahead sprawled impressively in the darkness, white fences cutting across rolling pastures, lights glowing from distant buildings. A discreet sign at the gate read, "Oak Ridge Farm, private property." Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. During one such flash, Jason spotted a large stable complex in the distance. The thought of dry hay and shelter made his tired muscles ache with longing. As he considered his options, a sound cut through the rain and wind, a high, piercing whinny that vibrated with distress. The sound carried a frequency of pain that seemed to resonate directly with something broken inside Jason's chest. He'd grown up around horses before his father died. Michael Miller had been renowned throughout Kansas for his ability to rehabilitate troubled horses, an intuitive gift he'd begun sharing with his son. "Horses speak their own language, Jace," he'd often said. "Most people never learn to listen." The whinny came again, more desperate this time. Before conscious thought could intervene, Jason was scaling the white fence, dropping quietly to the manicured grass on the other side. Keeping to shadows, he made his way toward the stable complex, guided by some internal compass that responded to the animal's distress. The main stable was elegant and modern, gleaming wood, discreet security cameras, and subtle lighting. Jason slipped between sensors, using puddles to mask his footprints. Through windows, he could see empty stalls with brass nameplates and plush bedding. But the sound had come from a separate building, smaller, more heavily secured. Jason approached cautiously, peering through a gap in the wooden slats. Inside, an Appaloosa stallion with a striking black and white coat paced frantically in a reinforced stall. The horse's movements were desperate, almost manic, slamming periodically against the walls, tossing his head as if fighting invisible demons. In the dim light, Jason could see sweat darkening the animal's coat despite the cool night. Something about the horse's panic struck Jason as familiar. Not the normal nervousness of a high-strung stallion, but something deeper. The animal wasn't just afraid. It was trapped in some private terror that had nothing to do with its current surroundings. A security light suddenly brightened outside, and Jason ducked behind a water trough. A night watchman passed, shining a flashlight briefly through the building's windows before continuing his rounds. When the light faded, Jason looked again at the Appaloosa. To his surprise, the horse had stopped its frantic movement and was standing perfectly still, ears pivoted forward toward Jason's hiding place. For a moment, their eyes met through the wooden slats, the boy's blue ones connecting with the liquid brown of the stallion's. In that brief exchange, something unspoken passed between them. The horse's nostrils flared slightly, testing the air before another sound startled him back into his panicked state. Jason remained frozen, heart pounding. He didn't understand what had just happened, but the connection had felt as tangible as a physical touch, two broken beings recognizing something familiar in each other's pain. When the night watchman's footsteps faded completely, Jason found a sheltered corner of the stable building with enough overhang to provide minimal protection from the rain. Exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he curled into the tightest ball he could manage, using his backpack as a pillow. The last sound he heard before drifting into uneasy sleep was the soft, rhythmic thumping of the Appaloosa's hooves against his stall, like a desperate Morse code that only Jason seemed equipped to understand. Morning light seeped through the stable windows, and Jason awoke with a jolt. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind. The unfamiliar surroundings, the soft nickering of horses, the sweet smell of hay mixed with leather and horse liniment. Cautiously, he peered around his hiding place. The stable was coming to life. Distant voices approached, metal buckets clanged. A radio somewhere played country music. Jason grabbed his backpack and prepared to slip away unnoticed. But before he could move, he glanced once more at the Appaloosa's stall. The magnificent horse stood perfectly still now, head turned directly toward Jason, ears pricked forward. Those intelligent eyes seemed to look straight through him. "What the hell are you doing here, boy?" a gruff voice demanded from behind. Jason spun around to face a tall, weathered man in a worn Stetson, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. The nameplate on his shirt pocket read, "Bobby Jenkins, Foreman." "What the hell are you doing here, boy?" The foreman's voice echoed through the quiet morning air of the stable. Jason froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Flight instinct screamed through his body, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. Behind him, he could feel the Appaloosa's eyes watching intently. "I asked you a question," Bobby repeated, taking a step closer. His weathered face was stern, but his eyes lacked the cruel glint Jason had learned to recognize in Roy's. "I was just—" Jason's voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "It was raining. I needed somewhere to sleep." Bobby's gaze swept over the boy, taking in the mud-splattered jeans, the worn backpack clutched protectively against his chest, the fading bruise on his cheekbone partially hidden by dirty blonde hair. "We've got an intruder here," Bobby called out, causing Jason's stomach to drop. "I'm calling the sheriff." From the doorway of the stable office emerged a woman with copper skin and silver-streaked black hair pulled into a practical braid. She wore a checkered apron over jeans and carried a thermos. "Hold on, Bobby," she said, her dark eyes assessing Jason with quiet intensity. "Look at him. He's just a scared, hungry boy." "He's trespassing, Marge," Bobby countered, though with less conviction. Marge approached slowly, the way one might approach a skittish colt. "When's the last time you ate something, child?" The simple kindness in her voice nearly undid Jason. He couldn't remember the last time an adult had spoken to him that gently. "Yesterday morning," he admitted. Marge turned to Bobby with a look that somehow ended the argument before it began. "He's having breakfast first, Then we'll figure things out." 20 minutes later, Jason sat at a worn wooden table in the farm's spacious kitchen, devouring scrambled eggs and bacon, while Marge and Bobby discussed his fate in hushed tones by the industrial-sized refrigerator. "We need extra help in the stables anyway," Marge was saying. "Let him stay a few days." Bobby sighed. "If Blackwood finds out we're harboring a runaway—" "Blackwood's in Dallas until Thursday," Marge countered. "And the boy clearly knows horses. Look how he watches everything." Jason kept his eyes on his plate, but his ears strained to catch every word. The food was the best he'd eaten in months, and his body hummed with the simple pleasure of a full stomach and the absence of fear, if only temporary. An hour later, Bobby assigned Jason to the most basic stable tasks: mucking out stalls, carrying hay, and filling water troughs. The work was physically demanding but straightforward, and Jason tackled it with quiet efficiency, grateful for the sanctuary it provided. Throughout the morning, he observed everything with careful attention: the rhythms of the stable, the hierarchy among the workers, and most importantly, the way everyone gave the Appaloosa's reinforced stall a wide berth. Shortly before noon, Jason paused in his work as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the main stable. A man in expensive boots and a custom-made cowboy hat stepped out, followed by another man carrying specialized equipment. "Professional trainer," whispered a stable hand working nearby. "Third one this month. Blackwood's getting desperate about that demon horse." From his position by the hay storage, Jason watched the men enter the Appaloosa's separate stable building. Minutes later, shouts and the violent sound of hooves striking wood erupted from inside. The trainer emerged 20 minutes after, his pristine clothes now dusty, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple. "That animal will never be broken," the man spat, storming toward the SUV. "It's a waste of money." Warren Blackwood's face was rigid with controlled anger as he followed. "I've invested too much to give up so easily." "Your money, your funeral," the trainer replied, climbing into his vehicle. "That horse has a devil in him." After they departed, the stable fell into an uneasy quiet. Jason continued his work, but his mind kept returning to the Appaloosa and the trainer's words. He recognized the dismissive cruelty in the diagnosis, the same quick judgment Roy used when something or someone didn't immediately bend to his will. When lunchtime came, the stable hands retreated to the mess hall. Jason noticed that no one approached the Appaloosa's stall, not even to provide food or water. A bucket and hay bale sat untouched outside the reinforced door. Making a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable, Jason waited until the last worker disappeared around the corner. Then, grabbing the water bucket and hay, he approached the separate building where the Appaloosa was kept. The structure was quieter than the main stable, designed for isolation rather than community. Through the stall door's small window, Jason could see the magnificent horse pacing in agitated circles, his coat darkened with sweat despite the cool air. Setting down the supplies, Jason pulled Black Beauty from his backpack and settled on the ground a safe distance from the stall door. For a moment, he simply sat in silence, letting his presence be known without demanding attention. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he began to read. "The first place that I can well remember was a large, pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it." At first, the Appaloosa continued pacing, ears flicking occasionally toward the unexpected sound. But as Jason continued reading, the horse's movements gradually slowed. By the third page, the stallion had stopped completely, standing with his head turned toward the door, ears pricked forward in unmistakable attention. Jason read steadily, his voice gaining confidence as he continued the familiar story. He was so absorbed in the connection forming between himself and the horse that he didn't notice the stable hands returning until their shadows fell across the concrete floor. "What the hell?" one exclaimed, moving forward abruptly. The Appaloosa immediately tensed, nostrils flaring, the brief calm shattered by the intrusion. As the stable hand reached to pull Jason away, the horse let out a threatening whinny, striking the stall door with enough force to make the reinforced wood shudder. "Leave the kid alone," Bobby's voice cut through the tension. The foreman stood in the doorway, assessing the situation with narrowed eyes. "Back away, Davis. Slowly. The stable hand retreated, and the Appaloosa's aggression diminished slightly, though the animal remained alert, gaze fixed on Jason. "It's the first time I've seen that devil not trying to kill someone," Davis muttered. Bobby studied Jason with new interest. "Come on, boy. Let's get that feed and water in there before he changes his mind." With Bobby supervising, Jason carefully opened the small feeding hatch at the bottom of the stall door. The Appaloosa watched warily but made no aggressive moves as Jason pushed the hay through, followed by the water bucket. Later that afternoon, as the day's activities wound down, Jason found himself alone in the tack room, organizing brushes and curry combs as Bobby had instructed. The creak of the door announced a visitor, and he turned to find Marge entering with a steaming mug. "Chamomile tea," she said, setting it on a shelf. "Good for soothing troubled spirits." Jason accepted it with a grateful nod, inhaling the sweet, herbal steam. "You two understand each other, don't you?" Marge asked quietly, nodding toward the direction of the Appaloosa's stall. Jason tensed, uncertain if he was in trouble. "Don't worry, child. I'm not going to tell on you." Marge's smile creased the corners of her eyes. "That one's a wild spirit, just like you." Jason stared into his tea, finding words difficult. "He's not bad," he finally whispered. "He's scared." Marge nodded as if he'd confirmed something she already knew. "My grandmother was a healer in the Cherokee Nation. She said some horses carry old souls that remember every kindness and cruelty they've ever experienced." "What's his name?" Jason asked. "The papers say Midnight Storm, but Blackwood calls him Thunder." "Thunder," Jason repeated softly, testing the name. "Tomorrow morning," Marge said, glancing toward the door to ensure they were alone. "Come to the kitchen before sunrise. I'll have food for you both." True to her word, Marge was waiting in the pre-dawn kitchen the next day, a paper bag and thermos ready. "Bobby's arranging the morning shifts, so Davis starts an hour later," she explained. "You'll have some time alone with Thunder." In the gray half-light of early morning, Jason approached Thunder's stall with his offerings: fresh apples from Marge, his harmonica, and his steady presence. This time he settled closer to the door, though still maintaining a respectful distance. Instead of reading, he simply talked, his voice low and conversational. "My dad trained horses," he began, carefully slicing an apple with his pocket knife. "Not like those men yesterday. He said you have to listen to what horses are telling you, not force them to listen to you." Thunder stood watchful but calm, his ears flicking toward Jason's voice. "He showed me how to recognize when a horse is afraid versus when it's angry. Most people can't tell the difference." Jason pushed a slice of apple through the feeding hatch. "They think if you're big and powerful, you must be dangerous. But sometimes the most powerful thing is just being scared." Over the next 5 days, Jason established a routine. Before dawn and again after the evening feeding, he spent time with Thunder, gradually moving closer to the stall door each session. The Appaloosa became increasingly receptive, approaching the door when Jason arrived, no longer pacing or showing signs of aggression. On the 6th morning, Jason brought his harmonica. Thunder, initially startled at the unfamiliar sound, backing away with nostrils flared. Jason immediately stopped, waiting patiently until the horse settled again. "My dad used to play this for nervous horses," he explained softly. "Said music speaks to parts of the brain that words can't reach." He began again, more softly this time, playing the simple melody his father had taught him. The notes floated through the early morning air, gentle and unhurried. Thunder's initial tension gradually melted away, replaced by curious attention. By the end of the week, Jason had moved a small stool directly beside the stall door. Thunder now pressed his nose against the small window when the boy arrived, inhaling deeply to catch his scent. Word spread among the stable hands about the kid who tamed the devil horse, and they began watching from a distance, amazed by the transformation. It was during one such morning session, as Jason played a particularly soothing melody on his harmonica, that the unexpected happened. Thunder extended his neck through the window of the stall door, stretching it to its full length. For a breathtaking moment, the magnificent animal held perfectly still, his muzzle inches from Jason's face, breathing in the boy's scent. The harmonica fell from Jason's suddenly trembling hands. Tears welled in his eyes as he remained motionless, hardly daring to breathe. Thunder didn't retreat, maintaining the unprecedented contact, his dark eye regarding Jason with what could only be described as cautious trust. The intimate moment was shattered by a sharp voice from the stable entrance. "Who the hell is this dirty kid in my stables? Get him out of here immediately." Warren Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, his expensive boots gleaming, his face darkening with anger as he surveyed the scene before him. Thunder immediately withdrew, retreating to the back of his stall with a nervous snort. As two stable hands hurried to escort Jason outside, the boy looked back in time to see the Appaloosa returning to his earlier agitation, striking the stall walls as if protesting the separation. "You two understand each other, don't you?" Marge said softly to Jason that night, bringing an extra blanket to the small tool room that had become his temporary shelter. "My grandmother used to say some people are born with the spirit of the horse in their souls. Tomorrow I want to show you something that might help you both." Before dawn the next morning, Jason waited anxiously outside the kitchen door. The stars still glimmered overhead, their light competing with the pale glow from the eastern horizon. His breath formed small clouds in the chilly air as he shifted from foot to foot, wondering what Marge had in mind. The door opened silently, revealing Marge's silhouette against the warm kitchen light. In her hands, she carried a small cloth bag that emitted a pungent, earthy aroma. "My grandmother's recipe," she whispered, handing him the bag. "Sage, sweetgrass, and cedar. The old ones used these herbs to gain the trust of horse spirits." Jason accepted the bag carefully, breathing in the complex, pleasant scent. "What do I do with it?" "Sprinkle a little around the entrance to his stall. Let him get used to the smell. It opens pathways between spirits." Marge's dark eyes held no trace of doubt. "The rest is for you to discover." She pressed a small paper bag into his other hand. "Breakfast for both of you. Fresh apples and oatmeal cookies. Bobby's arranged for Davis to start an hour later today." Jason nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Marge." The stable was still cloaked in pre-dawn shadows when Jason approached Thunder's separate building. The automatic lights hadn't yet triggered, leaving only the ambient glow of security lamps to guide his way. He moved quietly, his footsteps muffled by the soft earth. At Thunder's stall, Jason paused. The Appaloosa was already alert, his ears pricked forward at the sound of familiar footfalls. Unlike previous mornings, there was no anxious pacing or nervous huffing, just watchful anticipation. "Morning, Thunder," Jason said softly, settling his stool closer to the stall door than he'd dared before. The horse nickered softly in response, a sound Jason hadn't heard from him before. It was a gentle greeting, so different from the threatening whinnies Thunder directed at others. Carefully, Jason opened Marge's cloth bag and sprinkled a small amount of the dried herbs around the base of the stall door. The earthy scent rose immediately, mingling with the familiar smells of hay and horse. Thunder stretched his neck, nostrils flaring to investigate the new aroma. "My dad used to say that smell is a horse's strongest sense," Jason explained conversationally as he set up his small breakfast. "They can detect things we can't even imagine." He sliced an apple with his pocket knife, pushing pieces through the feeding hatch one by one. Thunder accepted each offering delicately, his lips velvety against Jason's palm through the opening. After they'd both eaten, Jason withdrew his harmonica from his pocket with slow, deliberate movements. Thunder's ears immediately focused on the gleaming instrument, his body tensing slightly at the unfamiliar object. "It's okay," Jason reassured him. "It's just music." He raised the harmonica to his lips and blew the first note hesitantly. Thunder immediately threw his head up, taking several quick steps backward, eyes wide with alarm. Jason lowered the instrument instantly. "Sorry, boy. Too much, too fast." He waited patiently, speaking in a low, steady voice until Thunder relaxed again. This time, when Jason lifted the harmonica, he did so even more gradually, narrating each movement. "I'm just going to play very softly. My dad taught me this song especially for nervous horses." The first notes were barely audible, just whispers of sound in the quiet morning air. Jason kept his eyes on Thunder, watching for signs of distress. The Appaloosa's ears swiveled toward the sound, his posture alert but not fearful. Slowly, Jason increased the volume, playing the gentle melody his father had composed, a simple, repeating pattern of notes that rose and fell like a lullaby. Thunder's initial tension gradually melted away, replaced by curious attention. His breathing slowed, synchronizing unconsciously with the rhythm of the music. When Jason finally lowered the harmonica, the silence between them felt charged with something new, a fragile bridge of communication beginning to form. For the next 3 mornings, Jason followed the same routine, arriving before dawn with Marge's herbs and treats, talking softly, and playing increasingly longer sessions on his harmonica. Thunder's response evolved from cautious acceptance to apparent enjoyment, his large eyes half closing in relaxation as the music filled his stall. On the 4th morning, disaster struck. As Jason was midway through a melody, the stable door crashed open, and Warren Blackwood strode in, flanked by Bobby and another man Jason didn't recognize. "What the hell is going on here?" Blackwood demanded, his voice echoing harshly in the quiet space. "Who authorized this kid to approach my $100,000 investment?" Thunder immediately retreated to the far corner of his stall, head high, nostrils flared in alarm. The peaceful connection shattered like glass. "Sir, I can explain," Bobby began, stepping forward. "The boy has a way with the horse. He's the only one. I don't care if he's the reincarnation of the horse whisperer himself," Blackwood cut in coldly. "He's an unauthorized stranger with no qualifications near my most valuable property." His gaze swept over Jason with undisguised contempt, taking in the worn clothes and dirty sneakers. "Get this vagrant off my farm immediately." Jason stood frozen, the harmonica clutched tightly in his hand. Behind him, thunder began to strike the walls of his stall, the distressed sounds growing more frantic by the second. "Mr. Blackwood," Bobby tried again. "The horse is calmer with him than with anyone else we've tried. Even professional trainers couldn't. The horse was fine before this intruder started interfering," Blackwood snapped. "For all we know, he's been agitating the animal." The thundering of hooves against wood grew more violent. Jason turned to see Thunder rearing up, striking the stall door with his front legs, eyes rolling with renewed panic. "See?" Bobby pointed out. "That's how he reacts to everyone else. But with the boy..." Blackwood's face darkened. "I want this vagabond off my property, now. And I want security tightened so we don't have children wandering into restricted areas." As 2 stable hands moved to escort Jason outside, he looked back at Thunder, who was now in a full-blown panic, throwing himself against the walls of his stall as if trying to follow. "Keep that filthy kid away from my horses," were Blackwood's final words as the stable door closed behind them. Despite the official ban, Marge and Bobby quickly became conspirators in ensuring Jason could still see Thunder. They developed an elaborate system of signals. A specific arrangement of feed buckets meant Blackwood was on the property, while a red bandana hanging from a particular post indicated the coast was clear. "He's only here Monday through Wednesday most weeks," Bobby explained during an impromptu strategy session in the tack room. "The rest of the time he's in Dallas or Houston on business." Marge added her own insight. "He usually arrives after 9 and leaves by 4. Dawn and dusk are your safest times." With their help, Jason established a new routine of early morning and evening visits. During these stolen moments, his connection with Thunder deepened. The Appaloosa now greeted him with soft nickering and would stand pressed against the stall door throughout Jason's visits. One particularly quiet morning, as Jason played a gentle melody on his harmonica, Thunder lowered his head in an unusual display of submission. As the proud neck curved downward, Jason noticed something he hadn't seen before: a long, jagged scar partially hidden beneath the horse's black and white mane. Setting aside his harmonica, Jason leaned closer to the small window in the stall door. "What happened to you, boy?" he whispered. The scar was clearly old, but had healed poorly, the tissue raised and irregular. It appeared to have been made by something sharp, perhaps a whip or chain, and had likely been left untreated. Without thinking, Jason reached toward his own back, fingers brushing the raised welts beneath his t-shirt, souvenirs from Roy's belt. Something shifted in his chest, a recognition so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "I know," he whispered, lifting his shirt just enough to reveal his own scars. "I know what it's like when the people who are supposed to protect you hurt you instead." Thunder remained still, his intelligent eyes fixed on Jason's face. The moment stretched between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared pain. The next evening, Jason brought a small jar of salve that Marge had prepared. "It's for wounds that haven't healed right," she'd explained. "Works for the outside ones, at least." When Jason approached the stall with the jar, Thunder observed him with newfound intensity. Jason uncapped the container, letting the horse smell the contents. A blend of herbs and beeswax with a medicinal scent. "This might help," Jason said softly, "if you'll let me." For several minutes, he simply sat beside the stall door, harmonica in hand, playing the melodies that had become their shared language. Thunder gradually relaxed, his breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the music. When the last notes faded, Jason set aside the harmonica and carefully extended his hand through the window of the stall door. It was a monumental risk. Thunder had injured handlers for far less intrusion, but something told Jason the time was right. His heart pounded as his fingers hovered inches from Thunder's muzzle. The Appaloosa regarded him steadily, neither advancing nor retreating. Then, in a moment that seemed to suspend time itself, Thunder extended his neck and allowed his soft muzzle to make contact with Jason's fingertips. The harmonica slipped from Jason's lap, forgotten as tears welled in his eyes. The touch was feather-light, a barely there connection that represented an impossible breach of the walls Thunder had built around himself. Jason remained perfectly still, afraid that even breathing might shatter the fragile trust being offered. Gradually, Thunder allowed more contact, his breath warm against Jason's palm. With trembling fingers, Jason reached higher, toward the base of the proud neck where the scar tissue marred the otherwise perfect coat. "In 15 years treating traumatized horses, I've never seen anything like this." The quiet voice from the doorway made Jason start. Sarah Jenkins, the farm's veterinarian, stood watching, her medical bag dropped forgotten at her feet. She took a tentative step forward, her expression a mixture of awe and professional curiosity. "That horse hasn't allowed anyone to touch him since he arrived. How did you manage it?" Before Jason could respond, the stable's intercom system crackled to life. "Dr. Jenkins, Mr. Blackwood requests your immediate presence in his office to discuss selling the Appaloosa to the slaughterhouse." The intercom's static-laced announcement hung in the air between them. Sarah's expression shifted from wonder to concern as she processed the message. "Wait here," she whispered to Jason, then squared her shoulders and strode purposefully toward the main house. Jason remained frozen beside Thunder's stall, his hand still resting on the horse's muzzle. The connection they'd established felt too precious, too fragile to break, even as panic rose in his chest. Thunder seemed to sense his distress, pressing his nose more firmly against Jason's palm with a soft exhale. "They can't send you away," Jason whispered, his voice catching. "I won't let them." 20 minutes later, Sarah burst back into the stable, slightly breathless. Bobby and Marge followed close behind, their faces tight with concern. "I bought us some time," Sarah announced, setting her medical bag on a nearby hay bale. "I told Blackwood I've identified an infection in Thunder's scar tissue that needs treatment before he can be sold at any price. Even for slaughter, a sick animal decreases the value." "How long did you get?" Bobby asked, glancing nervously toward the main house. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if I stretch it," Sarah replied, pulling latex gloves from her bag. "I wasn't entirely lying. That scar does look infected. I need to examine him properly." She approached Thunder's stall, medical kit in hand, but the horse immediately retreated to the far corner, ears pinned back in warning. "He won't let me near him," Sarah said, frustration evident in her voice. "Even sedated, he's nearly impossible to treat. The last time took 4 handlers and still resulted in injuries." Jason cleared his throat. "I could help. He trusts me." The 3 adults exchanged glances. It's worth trying, Marge said firmly. What do we have to lose? Sarah nodded slowly. All right, Jason. Show me what you can do. Jason lifted his harmonica and began to play the now familiar melody, his eyes never leaving Thunder's. The horse's ears flicked forward at the sound, his posture relaxing incrementally with each passing note. After several minutes, the Appaloosa moved cautiously back toward the stall door where Jason stood. Now talk to him, Jason instructed Sarah quietly between notes. Let him know what you're going to do before you do it. Sarah looked skeptical but followed his advice. I need to check your heart and lungs, big guy, she said softly. Then take a look at that scar. I'm not going to hurt you. To everyone's amazement, when Jason carefully guided Sarah's hand toward Thunder's neck, the horse allowed the contact, though his muscles trembled beneath her touch. Incredible, Sarah whispered as she pressed her stethoscope against Thunder's chest. His heart rate is actually normal. I've never been able to get a proper reading before. From the doorway, a small crowd of stable hands had gathered, watching in silent awe as the veterinarian performed a basic examination on the previously untouchable horse, all while Jason played his harmonica softly and occasionally guided Sarah's movements with quiet suggestions. That boy has his father's gift, Bobby said quietly to one of the older grooms. Haven't seen anything like it since Michael Miller passed. The groom's eyes widened. Miller? The boy is Michael Miller's son? Bobby nodded solemnly. Recognized the surname yesterday. Michael could calm any wild horse in Kansas without a rope or whip. Looks like his son inherited more than just his harmonica. As Sarah finished her examination, her professional composure nearly cracked. The infection isn't life-threatening, but it needs treatment. The scar tissue is inflamed and restricting his movement, which probably contributes to his aggression. Pain often does that. She turned to Jason. I need to apply an antibiotic ointment and possibly inject an anti-inflammatory. Do you think he'll allow it with your help? We can try, Jason said, moving his hand slowly up Thunder's neck until his fingers rested near the ragged scar. He knows I understand. Later that evening, after Thunder had indeed allowed treatment with Jason's assistance, Marge, Bobby, and Sarah gathered in the kitchen to discuss their next steps. We need to know more about Thunder's background, Sarah said, nursing a cup of coffee. That scar wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately hurt that horse, and the wound was left untreated. Marge nodded thoughtfully. I have friends in the Cherokee Nation who work the rodeo circuit. Let me make some calls. Bobby leaned forward, his weathered face serious. And we need to learn more about Jason's situation. If Blackwood starts asking questions, we need to be prepared. The boy clearly ran away from something bad, Sarah observed. Those scars on his back that he showed Thunder, they're consistent with abuse. Tomorrow I'll try to get him to open up, Marge said. He trusts me more than anyone else here. The following morning arrived with a fine mist hanging over the pastures. Jason was already at Thunder's stall when Marge found him, carefully applying the medicated ointment Sarah had provided to the horse's scar. He's letting you touch it now, Marge observed, setting down a thermos of hot chocolate. Jason nodded, his touch gentle as he worked the medicine into the damaged tissue. He knows I'm trying to help. Horses are smarter than most people think. Marge settled on a nearby bale of hay. My grandmother would agree with you. She always said horses remember everything, every kindness and every cruelty. For several minutes, they sat in comfortable silence. Thunder stood quietly under Jason's ministrations, occasionally turning to nuzzle the boy's shoulder in apparent gratitude. Jason, Marge finally said, her voice gentle but direct. I need to ask about the scars on your back. The boy's hand stilled momentarily, but he didn't pull away from Thunder. My stepdad, he said simply. Roy, he gets mean when he drinks, meaner when he's on meth. And your mother? Overdosed the night I left. I called 911 before I ran. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, as if reciting something that had happened to someone else. She married Roy after my dad died. Things got bad pretty quick. Marge's heart ached at the detached way he spoke, recognizing it as the self-protection it was. Your father was Michael Miller, wasn't he? The horse trainer. Jason looked up, surprise breaking through his careful composure. You knew my dad? Not personally, but his reputation reached even into Cherokee country. He helped rescue some Mustangs from my cousin's land when developers were trying to drive them off. Marge smiled softly. Bobby recognized your last name yesterday. Said your father could speak to horses in a way few people can. A ghost of a smile touched Jason's lips. Dad said it wasn't about talking to them. It was about listening. Most people never bother to listen to what horses are trying to tell them. Their conversation was interrupted by Bobby's arrival, his expression unusually animated. Sarah's just had a call from Blackwood. He's bringing some investors to see the farm this afternoon, and he wants Thunder presentable. Jason's hand instinctively moved to Thunder's neck in a protective gesture. What does that mean? It means, Bobby sighed, that Blackwood still thinks he can salvage his investment. He wants to show off the progress with Thunder, even though he had nothing to do with it. Throughout the morning, Marge made discreet phone calls whenever she could step away from her kitchen duties. By early afternoon, she had information that made her hands shake as she dialed Bobby's number. Meet me in the tack room, she whispered when he answered. Bring Sarah if you can. It's about Thunder. 30 minutes later, the three adults and Jason huddled in the musty tack room, the smell of leather and saddle soap heavy in the air. My cousin's friend worked at Silver Creek Ranch in Wyoming 2 years ago, Marge explained, her voice low. He remembers Thunder, called Midnight Storm then. The horse was being trained for rodeos, but he wouldn't cooperate. The trainer there was a man named Decker, known for breaking difficult horses. Breaking, Sarah repeated, her mouth set in a grim line. Not training. Marge nodded. Decker used methods that would be considered abuse in any reputable stable. When Thunder continued to resist, the punishment got worse. My contact says he saw Decker take a chain to the horse after a particularly bad session. That's likely where the scar came from. Jason's face had gone pale. What happened then? Thunder finally fought back, trampled Decker badly enough to put him in the hospital. After that, the ranch sold him quickly to a dealer, who must have concealed his history when Blackwood bought him. A heavy silence settled over the group as they processed this information. Jason's hands had curled into fists at his sides. No wonder he doesn't trust men in cowboy hats, Bobby muttered. Blackwood looks just like the typical rodeo boss. And that explains why he trusts Jason, Sarah added softly. No cowboy hat, no aggressive posture, no demands, just patience and gentleness. The conversation halted abruptly as the distant sound of car engines reached them. Through the small window, they could see a line of expensive vehicles approaching the main house. That'll be Blackwood and his investors, Bobby said grimly. We'd better get back to work before he notices we're huddled together plotting. The arrival of Warren Blackwood with a group of well-dressed businessmen created a flurry of activity throughout the farm. Stable hands rushed to make everything presentable, while Marge hurried to prepare refreshments for the unexpected guests. From his position near Thunder's stall, Jason could hear Blackwood's booming voice as he led the group on a tour, highlighting the farm's amenities and investment potential. The sound made Thunder's ears pin back nervously. It's okay, Jason soothed, playing a few soft notes on his harmonica. I won't let anything happen to you. As the tour group approached the separate stable building, Jason slipped into an empty stall across from Thunder's. Through the slats, he could see Blackwood leading 5 men in expensive suits toward the Appaloosa's enclosure. And here, Blackwood announced grandly, is our latest acquisition. Purebred Appaloosa with championship bloodlines. We're implementing an innovative training program with promising results. The men peered cautiously at Thunder, who stood rigid with tension, eyes rolling to show the whites. Seems a bit high-strung, one investor commented, taking a step back. Merely spirited, Blackwood countered smoothly. Quality horseflesh always has character. We expect him to be fully saddle-trained within the month. As the group moved on, Jason exhaled slowly, relieved that the encounter had passed without incident. But his relief was short-lived. Just as the investors disappeared around the corner, a police car pulled up to the main entrance of the farm. Through the stable window, Jason could see an officer in conversation with Blackwood, who pointed directly toward the stables. "We're looking for a runaway minor," the officer's voice carried clearly. "We believe he might be hiding on your property, Mr. Blackwood." Jason watched through the stable window as the police officer adjusted his hat and stepped closer to Blackwood. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat sending a wave of panic through his body. Running now would only attract attention, so he slipped deeper into the empty stall, pressing himself against the rough wooden wall. Bobby appeared at the stable entrance, intercepting the conversation. Though Jason couldn't hear the foreman's words, his casual stance and easy gestures suggested he was downplaying something. Blackwood's face, however, betrayed a different intention. His smile seemed calculated, predatory. "What's happening?" Marge whispered, suddenly beside Jason. She'd approached so silently he hadn't noticed her arrival. "Police," Jason breathed, barely audible. "Looking for a runaway." Marge's expression hardened. Without a word, she took Jason's arm and guided him swiftly through the back of the stable, past the feed storage, and toward the small cottage where Bobby lived with his wife, Linda. "Up there," she instructed, pointing to a narrow staircase leading to what appeared to be an attic space. "Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." From the small, dusty window of Bobby's attic, Jason could see Blackwood enthusiastically leading the police officer around the property. Unlike his reluctant tours with health inspectors or county officials, the wealthy rancher seemed almost eager, pointing toward various buildings with animated gestures. "He wants them to find me," Jason whispered to himself, the realization settling cold in his stomach. In his makeshift hiding place, surrounded by Christmas decorations and old suitcases, Jason hugged his knees to his chest. The familiar posture, the same way he'd curl up in the closet during Roy's rampages, brought no comfort now. His thoughts turned to Thunder, wondering if the Appaloosa was sensing his absence. The connection between them had grown so strong that Jason sometimes felt the horse could detect his emotions from across the property. Indeed, within the reinforced stall, Thunder had begun to pace. The Appaloosa's muscles twitched beneath his spotted coat, his ears swiveling nervously as unfamiliar voices approached. The scent of the police officer, gun oil, coffee, and a cologne that smelled disturbingly like Roy's triggered a cascade of fear responses. Thunder's breathing quickened, and he began striking the stall door with his hoof, the sound echoing through the stable like gunshots. "That's the problem horse I mentioned," Jason heard Blackwood explain as footsteps approached Thunder's enclosure. "Completely untamable. We're considering specialized trainers from Texas." The lie was smooth, practiced. No mention of the slaughterhouse, no acknowledgement of Jason's breakthrough. Thunder's distress increased as the men drew closer, his powerful body slamming against the walls of his confinement. "Quite a handful," the officer observed, keeping a respectful distance from the agitated animal. "Indeed," Blackwood replied. "Now, about this runaway boy you mentioned." Hours passed as the search continued. From his hiding place, Jason watched police cars come and go, their lights occasionally sweeping across the property as dusk approached. His stomach growled painfully. He hadn't eaten since early morning, but hunger was the least of his concerns. Meanwhile, in the farm's small office, Marge sat at the ancient desktop computer, her fingers moving methodically over the keyboard. She'd excused herself from kitchen duties, claiming to need inventory records, but her actual purpose was far different. On the screen, she navigated through social media pages belonging to members of the Cherokee community, sending private messages to contacts who might have information about both Thunder and Jason's situations. Her cousin in Oklahoma responded almost immediately. The boy's stepfather was arrested 3 days ago. Production of methamphetamine and aggravated assault. Mother still in hospital. Social services looking for the child. Marge closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this information. The situation was both better and worse than she'd feared. At least Roy was behind bars, but now official channels were actively searching for Jason. Another message appeared from a different contact, this one accompanied by a news article link. Roy Denton arrested in drug bust. Wife hospitalized with critical overdose. Stepson missing. The article included a blurry school photograph of Jason from the previous year. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. As evening settled over the farm, Eleanor Hayes drove her modest sedan down the long driveway of Oak Ridge Farm. At 70, the retired schoolteacher maintained the straight-backed posture and observant gaze that had commanded respect from generations of Clearwater students. Her silver hair was neatly pinned in a practical bun, and though her clothes were simple, they carried the dignified air of someone who valued quality over fashion. At the reception desk, she offered a pleasant smile to the young woman who greeted her. "I'm Eleanor Hayes, researching local equine history for the County Historical Society. I understand Oak Ridge Farm has quite the collection of championship bloodlines." The receptionist looked uncertain. "We don't usually offer tours without an appointment, ma'am." "Oh, I completely understand," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying the gentle authority that had served her well during 40 years of teaching. "Perhaps Mr. Blackwood might make an exception. I'm particularly interested in documenting the Appaloosa breeding programs in Kansas." The mention of publicity, however modest, worked its magic. Within minutes, Blackwood himself appeared in the reception area, his custom boots gleaming, Stetson hat perfectly positioned. "Mrs. Hayes, what a pleasure. I'd be delighted to show you our operation personally." The charm switched on like a well-oiled machine. "We're quite proud of our contribution to preserving historic bloodlines." Eleanor accepted his offered arm with gracious poise, though inwardly she noted how quickly his demeanor had transformed from the irritation she'd glimpsed when first entering. As a lifelong observer of human behavior, she recognized the performance for what it was. The tour proceeded through the main stable complex, with Blackwood highlighting expensive facilities and prize-winning horses. Eleanor asked appropriate questions, taking notes in a small leather-bound journal, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "And what about the Appaloosa I've heard mentioned? Thunder, is it?" she inquired innocently as they passed the separate stable building. Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "A recent acquisition, still adjusting to his new environment." "Might I see him? Appaloosas have such fascinating historical significance to the American West." Blackwood hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Briefly. He's somewhat temperamental." As they approached Thunder's enclosure, Eleanor noticed something unusual. A boy slipping quietly from a side door, harmonica in hand. Though he vanished almost instantly behind a feed bin, she caught a glimpse of his face. Thin, wary, with eyes that held too much knowledge for his years. Inside, Thunder was pacing anxiously, his coat darkened with sweat despite the cool air. When Blackwood appeared in the doorway, the horse's reaction was immediate and violent. Rearing up, nostrils flared, a terrified whinny tearing from his throat. "As you can see," Blackwood said smoothly, "we're working through some behavioral issues." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, her attention split between the distressed animal and the spot where she'd seen the boy disappear. "Traumatized horses often require specialized care. I once wrote an article about rehabilitation techniques for abused show horses." Blackwood's expression suggested this conversation had taken an unwelcome turn. "We employ only the finest trainers, Mrs. Hayes. Now, shall we continue to the breeding facilities?" As they walked away, Eleanor glanced back in time to see the boy reappear, moving silently toward Thunder's stall. Within seconds, the horse's frantic movements began to calm, his attention focused entirely on the small figure now playing a soft melody on the harmonica. The transformation was remarkable, the wild-eyed, panic-stricken animal gradually becoming still, ears forward, head lowering to the level of the boy's chest. Eleanor quietly withdrew her phone from her pocket and, shielded by Blackwood's turned back, captured several photographs of the interaction. Later, as the tour concluded, Eleanor accidentally took a wrong turn while Blackwood was momentarily distracted by a phone call. She found herself near the maintenance shed where Bobby was repairing a tractor. "Excuse me," she called softly. "I seem to have lost my way." Bobby looked up, startled. "The main house is back that way, ma'am." "Actually," Eleanor said, lowering her voice and showing him the photographs on her phone, "I was hoping to ask about this boy and this horse." Bobby's weathered face registered shock, then wariness. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "I think you do," Eleanor replied gently. "My name is Eleanor Hayes. I taught school in Clearwater for 40 years, but these days I run a blog about animal welfare. That boy has a gift, and that horse has suffered. I'd like to help both of them." Bobby studied her for a long moment, weighing invisible calculations in his mind. Finally, he sighed. "Come back after 6. Take the service road behind the property. Marge will meet you." As darkness fell, the police finally departed without finding Jason. Bobby's wife, Linda, brought a plate of food to the attic hideaway, her kind face creased with concern. "They're gone for now," she assured him, "but Marge says they'll likely be back with a warrant." Jason nodded silently, too exhausted to speak. The strain of hiding, coupled with worry for Thunder, had drained him completely. "There's someone who wants to meet you," Linda added. "A teacher from town. Bobby says she might be able to help." In the kitchen of Bobby and Linda's cottage, Eleanor Hayes sat with Marge, their heads bent close in serious conversation. When Jason entered, both women looked up, their expressions softening at his appearance. Thin frame, clothes hanging loose, dark circles under wary eyes. "This is Eleanor," Marge introduced. "She saw you with Thunder today." Eleanor smiled gently. "What you're doing with that horse is remarkable, Jason. I've documented cases of animal rehabilitation for years, but seldom seen such a natural connection." Jason shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. He just needs someone to understand him. "I believe that's true," Eleanor agreed, "and I think perhaps you need the same." Over the next hour, Eleanor explained her work, documenting cases of animal abuse and advocating for better protection laws. Her blog had thousands of followers, and she had connections with several animal welfare organizations. "People need to see what's happening here, both the healing and the threat," she explained, showing Jason the photographs she'd taken. "With your permission, I'd like to share your story." Before Jason could respond, the cottage door opened, and Bobby entered with a grim expression. "Blackwood's hired Chester Monroe," he announced without preamble. "He arrives tomorrow." The name meant nothing to Jason, but the adult's reactions told him everything he needed to know. "Monroe is the worst kind of horsebreaker," Marge explained, her voice tight with anger. "Uses fear and pain to control animals. They call him the Hammer because he breaks spirits, not just behavior." 2 weeks, Bobby added. "Blackwood's given him 2 weeks to make Thunder saddle ready, or the horse goes to slaughter." A cold determination settled over Jason. "I need to see Thunder tonight." Under cover of darkness, Marge led Jason back to the stables. Thunder greeted him with a soft nicker of recognition, pressing his nose against the small window in his stall door. "I won't let them hurt you," Jason promised, stroking the velvet muzzle gently. "Somehow we'll figure this out." As he played his harmonica softly, Thunder's eyes half closed in contentment, temporarily free from the fear that plagued him. Neither of them noticed Eleanor discreetly capturing the moment with her camera, her face soft with compassion in the dim stable light. "I can't go back to Roy," Jason whispered, his voice trembling as the reality of his situation crashed over him. "He'll kill me this time." His gaze fixed on Thunder through the window, the horse agitated in his stall, and a fierce determination hardened in the boy's eyes. "If they take me away, I have to free Thunder first. I can't leave him in the hands of that man." The words hung in the silence of Bobby's cottage as Jason's fear transformed into resolve. His face, so young yet weathered by experience, hardened into something beyond his 13 years. Marge exchanged worried glances with Bobby and Eleanor, recognizing the dangerous determination forming in the boy's eyes. "Let's not be hasty," Eleanor said gently, setting her teacup on the worn kitchen table. "There are legal channels we can explore first." The first light of dawn was still hours away when Chester Monroe's black pickup truck rolled through the gates of Oak Ridge Farm. Even his arrival seemed calculated for intimidation. The custom exhaust rumbling like distant thunder, the polished truck gleaming despite the pre-dawn darkness. Jason, unable to sleep, watched from Bobby's attic window as the infamous horse trainer stepped down from his vehicle. Chester moved with the bow-legged swagger of a man accustomed to dominance. Snakeskin boots clicked against the gravel, the coiled whip at his belt swinging with each step. Even from a distance, Jason could see the cold calculation in the man's eyes as he surveyed the property like a general assessing a battlefield. "That's him," Bobby whispered from behind, making Jason start. "Chester Monroe. He's broken more horses than most trainers have even handled, but broken is the right word. Animals come out obedient, but empty." By mid-morning, Jason had slipped back to his regular chores, keeping his head down whenever Blackwood or Chester passed nearby. From the adjacent paddock, he could hear the sharp crack of Chester's whip, followed by Thunder's terrified whinnies. Each sound cut through Jason like physical pain. "Don't watch," Marge advised, finding him frozen beside the water trough, white-knuckled hands gripping the metal rim. "It'll only break your heart." But Jason couldn't stay away. During Chester's lunch break, he crept to Thunder's stall, finding the proud Appaloosa trembling, sweat-darkened patches staining his spotted coat. A thin line of blood trickled from his flank where the whip had found its mark. "What have they done to you?" Jason whispered, slipping inside the stall without hesitation. Thunder's eyes rolled wildly until Jason's scent reached him, the panicked breathing gradually slowing as the boy approached with quiet, measured steps. "I'm here, boy. I'm here." His voice barely audible, Jason began to hum the melody that had become their shared language. Slowly, he lifted a damp cloth to Thunder's bleeding flank. The horse flinched but allowed the gentle cleaning of his wound. Their quiet moment ended abruptly with the slam of the stable door. Chester Monroe stood silhouetted in the entrance, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten in his hand. "Well, well," he drawled, tossing the sandwich aside. Blackwood mentioned there was a stable boy who thought he had the magic touch. Jason straightened, positioning himself between Chester and Thunder. "You're hurting him. This isn't training." Chester's laugh held no humor. "Listen to the little horse whisperer. Boy, that animal tried to kill 2 handlers before I got here. Pain is the only language stubborn horses understand." "You're wrong." Jason's voice remained steady despite his racing heart. "He's scared, not stubborn. Someone hurt him before and you're making it worse." The trainer's face darkened. "Step aside, kid. Playtime's over. I've got a job to do." "No." Jason planted his feet firmly, feeling Thunder's breath warm against his back. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the stable hands. By the time Chester grabbed Jason's arm roughly, a small crowd had gathered at the stall door. "Get your hands off him." Bobby's authoritative voice cut through the tension. The foreman stood with arms crossed, his weathered face uncharacteristically hard. Chester released Jason with a dismissive shove. "Keep your brat under control, Jenkins. Blackwood's paying me to get results, not babysit some kid who thinks horses have feelings." "The boy has every right to express his opinion," Bobby replied evenly. "Especially when he's the only one who's made any progress with that horse without violence." In his office, Warren Blackwood watched the scene unfold on the security monitor, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The confrontation itself didn't surprise him. He'd anticipated resistance from the soft-hearted stable staff. What caught his attention was the number of employees who had stopped their work to witness the standoff, their faces reflecting clear support for the boy. More troubling were the comments on Oak Ridge Farm's social media pages. Someone had been sharing stories about a miracle worker who could calm the savage Appaloosa, stories that directly contradicted the narrative Blackwood was carefully constructing about Chester's professional rehabilitation methods. When his assistant brought him a printout of Eleanor Hayes's latest blog post, Blackwood's facade of calm finally cracked. The retired teacher had published a moving account of a troubled horse finding connection with an orphaned boy, accompanied by several unauthorized photographs taken on his property. "Find out everything about this woman," he snapped, crumpling the paper in his fist. "And that boy. I want to know exactly who we're dealing with." The following days established a pattern. a silent battle of wills between Chester and Jason for influence over Thunder. During daylight hours, Chester employed increasingly harsh methods, determined to break the horse's spirit through a combination of exhaustion, pain, and fear. Each evening after the trainer departed, Jason would slip into the stall to undo the day's damage with gentle words, soothing music, and patient presence. Thunder's responses told the story of this tug-of-war. With Chester, the horse remained defiant despite punishment, his eyes wild with terror that manifested as aggression. With Jason, the same animal would gradually relax, lowering his proud head to rest against the boy's shoulder, releasing shuddering breaths that seemed to expel the day's trauma. Eleanor's blog documented this contrast with devastating clarity. Her daily updates included testimony from stable hands who had witnessed both approaches, creating a narrative that resonated deeply with her growing audience. "The boy speaks the language of trust," she wrote. "The trainer speaks only domination. Which voice will ultimately reach this magnificent creature's heart?" On the fourth day, Jason arrived at the stable before dawn to find Thunder barely able to stand. New welts crisscrossed his hindquarters, and blood had dried in dark streaks down his legs. "What did he do to you?" Jason whispered, tears streaming down his face as he gently bathed the wounds. Thunder stood unmoving, his head hanging low, a dullness in his eyes that frightened Jason more than any previous aggression. When Chester arrived later that morning, Jason was waiting outside the stable, rage overcoming his usual caution. "You're killing him," he shouted, blocking the trainer's path. "Look what you've done." Chester's face remained impassive as he pushed past Jason. "Step aside, boy. This is men's work." "This isn't work. It's torture." Jason's voice cracked with emotion. "You're too stupid and cruel to see there's another way." The confrontation drew attention from across the yard. Stable hands paused in their morning chores, watching the uneven standoff between the slight boy and the burly trainer. Chester's composure finally broke. He grabbed Jason by the collar, lifting him until his toes barely touched the ground. "Listen, you little vagrant. That horse is worth more than you'll ever be. Adults who know what they're doing are in charge here, not some runaway trash who should be in juvenile detention." "That's enough!" Bobby's voice cut through the tense scene as he strode across the yard. "Put him down, Monroe. Now." Chester released Jason with a contemptuous shove, sending the boy stumbling backward. "Control your staff, Jenkins, or I'll speak to Blackwood about who's really running this farm." As the trainer stalked away, Bobby helped Jason to his feet. "You need to be more careful," he warned, glancing toward the main house where security cameras recorded every movement. "Picking fights won't help Thunder." Unknown to either of them, Blackwood had indeed been watching. The security footage provided a silent record of the confrontation, capturing Jason's passionate defense of the horse. As Blackwood reviewed the video, an idea began to form, a way to solve two problems at once. That afternoon, a county car pulled into Oak Ridge Farm's circular drive. From it emerged Sheila Reynolds, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s wearing a department-issue blazer. Her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The ID badge clipped to her lapel identified her as a representative of Child Protective Services. "We've received reports of a possible underage runaway living on these premises," she informed the receptionist crisply. "I need to speak with the property owner." Blackwood welcomed her with practiced charm, his concern for the child's welfare seemingly genuine. "We've been quite worried ourselves," he confided, leading her toward his office. "The boy appeared about 2 weeks ago. Some of my staff have been sheltering him, but clearly, he belongs with his family." "I'll need to interview the minor," Sheila stated, unswayed by Blackwood's performance. "Alone." Before Blackwood could respond, Bobby appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Blackwood, there's an urgent call from the Houston office." The interruption was too convenient to be coincidental, but Blackwood couldn't refuse without appearing suspicious. "Of course, Mrs. Reynolds. Bobby will take you to the boy while I handle this call. Please make yourself at home." As soon as Blackwood disappeared into his office, Bobby's demeanor changed completely. "Ms. Reynolds, there's something you should know before you meet Jason. His stepfather is Roy Denton." Sheila's professional mask slipped momentarily, recognition flashing in her eyes. The meth dealer from the Wichita bust? The one who put his wife in the ICU? Bobby nodded grimly. That's why the boy ran. He's got scars that tell the whole story. In the small break room where Jason waited, Eleanor Hayes sat beside him, her presence a calming influence. When Sheila entered, the retired teacher rose with quiet dignity. Ms. Reynolds, Eleanor greeted her. I taught in Clearwater for 40 years. I know you're just doing your job, but this boy needs protection, not return to an abusive situation. Sheila's face remained professionally neutral as she took a seat across from Jason. I need to ask you some questions, she began, her voice gentler than her appearance suggested. Everything you tell me is confidential. As Jason recounted his life with Roy, the beatings, the terror, his mother's deterioration into addiction, Sheila took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions without judgment or disbelief. When he lifted his shirt to show the crisscrossing scars, her pen stilled, and genuine compassion flickered across her features. Unknown to them, Blackwood had finished his call and was approaching the break room, intent on controlling the narrative. Through the small window in the door, he observed the interview with growing frustration. This wasn't proceeding as he'd planned. The social worker wasn't simply collecting the boy for return to his guardians. I can't go back to Roy, Jason said, his voice barely audible. He'll kill me this time. His gaze drifted toward the window that overlooked the stables where Thunder was confined. A fierce determination hardened in his eyes. If they take me away, I have to free Thunder first. I can't leave him in the hands of that man. The words had barely left Jason's mouth when the door to the break room swung open. Blackwood stood in the doorway, his imposing frame blocking the exit, a thin smile masking his irritation. Ms. Reynolds, he said smoothly, I trust you're getting all the information you need. As concerned citizens, we're eager to help this young man return to proper care. Sheila closed her notebook deliberately, her expression revealing nothing. Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate your cooperation, but I'll need additional time to complete my assessment. My preliminary findings suggest Jason's previous home environment was problematic. Of course, Blackwood nodded with practiced sympathy. Such a shame. However, I'm sure the proper authorities can sort everything out. When will you be returning with the court order to place him in custody? The directness of the question hung in the air. Jason's hands curled into fists beneath the table, his eyes darting toward the window where the stables were visible in the distance. I'll be submitting my report tomorrow, Sheila replied carefully. These matters take time to process through the system. Until then, the boy remains where he is. That night, beneath a moonless sky, Jason lay awake in his makeshift bed in Bobby's tool shed. The social worker's imminent return with a court order meant his time at Oak Ridge Farm was running out. Through the small window, he could see the separate building where Thunder was kept, a single security light illuminating its entrance. Sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Thunder's dull gaze from that morning, the light of spirit gradually being extinguished by Chester's brutal methods. He thought of the fresh wounds, the trembling muscles, the way the proud Appaloosa had simply stood there, too exhausted to even resist the pain. Just past midnight, Jason slipped from his bed and pulled on his boots. His decision wasn't rational. It was born of desperation and an unspoken promise between two wounded souls. He couldn't save himself from being returned to the system, but perhaps he could save Thunder from Chester Monroe. The night air carried the scent of approaching rain as Jason made his way silently across the darkened property. Years of creeping around Roy's trailer to avoid confrontation had taught him how to move with ghost-like stealth. He avoided the main pathways where security cameras might catch his movement, instead using the shadows of equipment sheds and hay storage as cover. At the kitchen's back door, a small figure waited, Marge, her silver-streaked hair gleaming faintly in the darkness. I knew you'd try something tonight, she whispered, pressing a small cloth bag into his hand. Food for the journey. And this, she added a hand-carved wooden pendant on a leather cord. For protection. Cherokee medicine. I can't let them hurt him anymore, Jason said, his voice tight with emotion. Marge nodded, understanding in her eyes. The north fence by the old oak has a section that's rusted through. Bobby's been meaning to fix it for weeks now. The hint was clear. Be careful, Waya. She used the Cherokee word for wolf, a lonely survivor. The stable was eerily quiet as Jason approached. He'd expected at least one night watchman, but the usual patrol was notably absent. Later, he would learn that Bobby had orchestrated a false alarm at the opposite end of the property, drawing security away for precisely this window of time. Thunder sensed Jason before the boy reached the stall. A soft nicker of recognition greeted him as he slipped inside the building, the sound nearly breaking his heart with its trust. When Jason opened the stall door, the Appaloosa made no move to bolt or rear. He simply stood watching, ears pricked forward attentively. "We're leaving," Jason whispered, reaching into his pocket for the length of soft rope he'd brought. Not a halter or bridle that would remind Thunder of control and pain, just a gentle guide that the horse could easily break if he chose. Thunder's nostrils flared as he inhaled Jason's scent, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the unusual hour, the urgency in the boy's movements. When Jason looped the rope loosely around his neck, the horse remained perfectly still, as if considering the proposition being offered. "I know you don't trust ropes," Jason acknowledged softly, his hand stroking the muscled neck. "But I need some way to guide you. I promise it's not to control you." The night seemed to hold its breath as boy and horse stood in silent communion. Then, with deliberate gentleness, Jason lifted his harmonica to his lips and played the quietest version of their melody, just enough for Thunder to recognize the familiar notes. The effect was immediate. The horse's posture relaxed, his breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the music. When Jason took a step toward the stall door, Thunder followed without hesitation. The journey through the darkened stable was tense, each creaking board, each shift of Thunder's weight sounding impossibly loud in the midnight silence. Jason kept one hand on the loose rope, the other gently touching the horse's shoulder, maintaining the connection that had become their lifeline. Outside, the night air carried the scent of freedom, grass, earth, and open sky. Thunder's nostrils widened, drinking in sensations he'd been denied for months of confinement. His muscles tensed beneath Jason's hand, the instinct to run nearly overwhelming. "Slow," Jason murmured. "We need to be quiet until we're past the fence." Together they moved across the expansive property, keeping to the shadows of buildings and trees. Thunder followed Jason's lead with an unnatural patience for such a powerful animal, his steps measured and careful, as if understanding the need for stealth. As they approached the north fence line, Jason's heart began to pound painfully in his chest. The oak tree Marge had mentioned loomed ahead, its ancient branches stretching protectively over the boundary of Oak Ridge Farm. Freedom was just yards away. The sound of car engines shattered the night's silence. Headlights swept across the distant main entrance, illuminating the property in harsh white light. Jason froze, one hand clutching Thunder's rope, the other pressed against the horse's neck to steady them both. The Appaloosa's muscles bunched beneath his touch, adrenaline surging through the powerful body. "Easy," Jason whispered, his own fear threatening to overtake him. "Easy, boy." The vehicles weren't police cars as he'd initially feared. They were ordinary sedans and pickup trucks, at least a dozen of them, pulling up to the main gate of the farm. In the glow of headlights, Jason could make out a group of people gathering, some carrying what appeared to be signs. "We need to keep moving," Jason urged, guiding Thunder toward the weak section of fence Marge had described. The horse followed trustingly, even as his instincts must have been screaming to flee from the commotion. At the fence, Jason carefully pushed aside the loose section of wire, creating an opening just wide enough for Thunder to squeeze through. The horse hesitated, sensing the boundary even in the darkness. "It's okay," Jason encouraged. "Freedom is on the other side." As Thunder cautiously stepped through the gap, a familiar voice called softly from the shadows beyond. "Jason, is that you?" Eleanor Hayes emerged from behind a large oak tree, her silver hair catching the faint moonlight. She wasn't alone. Several townspeople stood with her, their expressions a mixture of concern and determination. "You don't need to run," Eleanor said gently, approaching with slow, careful movements that wouldn't startle Thunder. "We've come to help." Jason's confusion must have been evident on his face. Eleanor gestured toward the gathering at the main gate. "That's the community of Clearwater showing up for you both. When I published the truth about what's happening here, people responded. They're here to bear witness." Thunder shifted nervously at the presence of strangers, pressing closer to Jason's side. The boy instinctively placed himself between the horse and the newcomers, one hand resting reassuringly on Thunder's neck. "What can they do?" Jason asked, his voice hollow with exhaustion and doubt. "Blackwood owns this place. He can do whatever he wants." "Not quite," came another voice from the darkness. Sheila Reynolds stepped forward, official-looking documents in her hand. "Sometimes even the wealthy have to answer to the law." Over the next hour, as dawn began to break over the Kansas horizon, Jason learned what had been happening while he'd been planning his desperate escape. Eleanor's blog posts had gone viral, picked up by regional news outlets and animal rights organizations. The photographs of Thunder's wounds, coupled with Jason's evident gift for reaching the traumatized animal, had struck a chord with readers far beyond Clearwater. Meanwhile, Sheila had been conducting her own investigation, discovering the full extent of Roy Denton's crimes and confirming Jason's accounts of abuse. The court had already issued an emergency order removing Jason from his stepfather's custody. He would not be returning to Roy under any circumstances. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, Warren Blackwood's SUV came barreling down the main drive, spraying gravel as it skidded to a halt. The crowd at the gate had grown to nearly 50 people, many holding handmade signs with messages like "Justice for Thunder" and "Let them heal together." When Blackwood emerged from his vehicle, his usual composed facade had cracked, revealing the fury beneath. The sight of Thunder standing calmly beside Jason outside the property line, surrounded by supportive townspeople, stopped him in his tracks. "This is trespassing," he shouted, storming toward the group. "That horse is my property." "Actually, Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor stepped forward, her teacher's voice cutting through his bluster, "we have evidence suggesting Thunder was sold to you illegally. The original sale from Silver Creek Ranch violated several ownership clauses." Chester Monroe arrived moments later, his truck skidding to a halt beside Blackwood's SUV. The trainer's face darkened when he saw Thunder standing quietly beside Jason, making a mockery of his claims that the horse was uncontrollably violent. As camera flashes began popping from the growing crowd of supporters and local press, Blackwood realized he was losing control of the narrative. With a visible effort, he smoothed his expression and adjusted his tone. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he announced loudly enough for the cameras to catch. "Oak Ridge Farm has always prioritized animal welfare. If there are concerns about this particular horse's treatment, we're certainly open to discussion." Jason watched the performance with newfound clarity, Thunder's warm breath against his shoulder grounding him in a truth that Blackwood's words could not obscure. The wealthy rancher continued his impromptu press conference, attempting to reframe the situation as a simple misunderstanding between well-meaning parties. The spin might have worked if Blackwood hadn't made one critical error. Assuming his authority would prevail, he approached Thunder directly, a halter in his hand. "Let me demonstrate that there's no issue here," he declared confidently, stepping toward the Appaloosa. As Blackwood drew near, Thunder's demeanor changed instantly. His ears flattened against his head, nostrils flaring with recognition of the man whose presence had always preceded pain. The horse backed away, pressing against Jason protectively. "Come here, you stupid animal," Blackwood muttered through clenched teeth, his public smile faltering. "I paid $100,000 for you." In a moment that seemed choreographed by some higher power, Thunder deliberately stepped away from Blackwood and positioned himself behind Jason, as if choosing his protector. The boy, small and slender beside the magnificent animal, reached back to touch Thunder's neck in a gesture of reassurance that required no words. Camera flashes captured the powerful image, the wealthy man with his expensive hat and empty halter, facing a boy in worn clothes with a traumatized horse seeking shelter behind him. The contrast could not have been more stark or more damning. while flashbulbs captured the moment that Thunder deliberately placed Jason between himself and Blackwood. A local TV reporter's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "We're witnessing something extraordinary at Oak Ridge Farm tonight. A horse deemed too dangerous to handle appears to have chosen an orphaned boy as his protector. The question on everyone's mind: who has the real right to this magnificent animal? The man who paid for him, or the boy who earned his trust?" The image of Jason standing protectively between Thunder and Blackwood spread across social media within hours. Local news stations aired the footage repeatedly, each broadcast reaching farther than the last. By morning, 3 national networks had picked up the story, packaging it with emotional taglines: "Boy and Horse, a bond beyond ownership," and "The Whisper of Wichita, orphan tames the untamable." Thunder's transformation from dangerous investment to sympathetic victim shifted public perception overnight. The hashtag Thunder and Jason trended across Kansas, then regionally, gathering support from animal rights activists, horse enthusiasts, and ordinary people touched by the unfolding drama. Warren Blackwood emerged from his office the following morning to find a dozen reporters camped at the main gate of Oak Ridge Farm. The media presence had doubled since dawn, with satellite trucks from Kansas City and Tulsa now parked alongside local news vans. Through his office window, he could see photographers with telephoto lenses capturing every movement around the stables. "Get me Harrington from PR," he snapped into his phone. "This is getting out of hand." Within hours, Blackwood had assembled his crisis management team in the farm's conference room. The wall-mounted television cycled through news coverage, each clip more damaging than the last. The most problematic showed Thunder trembling at Blackwood's approach, then deliberately positioning himself behind Jason. "We need to reframe this narrative immediately," advised Caroline Harrington, Blackwood's longtime publicist. Her tailored suit and immaculate appearance belied the stress evident in her voice. "The boy and horse angle is killing us. Every mother in America is falling in love with this story." "What do you suggest?" Blackwood asked, drumming his fingers impatiently on the polished conference table. "Embrace it," Caroline replied simply. "Make yourself the benevolent overseer who recognized the special connection. Position Oak Ridge Farm as the facilitator of this miracle, not its opponent." Blackwood's face darkened. "That kid is a trespasser. The horse is my property." "Not in the public eye, not anymore," Caroline countered, sliding a tablet across the table. On the screen was Eleanor Hayes's blog, now receiving hundreds of thousands of views. "This retired teacher has turned you into the villain of a modern fairy tale. We need to flip the script." By midday, Blackwood had reluctantly agreed to a carefully orchestrated press conference. Standing at a podium erected on the manicured lawn of Oak Ridge Farm, he delivered a performance worthy of a seasoned politician. "From the moment young Jason arrived at our facility, we recognized his extraordinary gift with animals," Blackwood declared, his voice carrying just the right notes of humility and admiration. "While his presence was unexpected, his connection with Thunder has been nothing short of remarkable." Cameras flashed as Blackwood continued, describing a fictional version of events where Oak Ridge Farm had provided a safe environment for this organic partnership to develop. He conveniently omitted Chester Monroe's brutal methods, the slaughterhouse threats, and his own attempts to have Jason removed. "Moving forward," Blackwood concluded with practiced sincerity, "we are proud to offer Jason an official position as junior training assistant, where he can continue his important work with Thunder under proper supervision." The reporters present seemed skeptical, but grateful for the quotable material. One young journalist from the Wichita Eagle raised her hand persistently until called upon. "Mr. Blackwood, multiple sources claim you threatened to send Thunder to slaughter just 3 days ago. Would you care to comment?" The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly before he recovered. "A complete misunderstanding," he replied smoothly. "In the horse business, we often discuss difficult options when an animal presents behavioral challenges. However, Thunder's rehabilitation has always been our priority." Meanwhile, in the small cottage belonging to Bobby and Linda, Jason watched the press conference with mounting disbelief. Thunder had been moved to a paddock adjacent to the cottage, visible through the window where the boy sat. The Appaloosa grazed peacefully, occasionally lifting his head to check Jason's whereabouts, a new behavior that spoke volumes about their evolving bond. "He's lying," Jason said quietly, as Blackwood described the supportive environment Oak Ridge Farm had supposedly provided. "He wanted to kill Thunder." Bobby nodded grimly. "That's Warren Blackwood. Never met a truth he couldn't bend to his advantage." "What happens now?" Jason asked, turning away from the television. "He's still acting like he owns us both." Before Bobby could answer, Sheila Reynolds arrived with a thick folder of documents. The social worker's practical appearance, sensible shoes, and a no-nonsense blazer contrasted with the genuine warmth in her eyes as she greeted Jason. "I've completed my preliminary investigation," she announced, setting her materials on the kitchen table. "The situation with your stepfather is worse than initially reported. Roy Denton has been charged with multiple felonies, including child endangerment and manufacturing methamphetamine. Your mother remains in intensive care, but is expected to recover physically." Jason absorbed this information with the stoicism of a child who had long since learned not to expect rescue. "So what happens to me?" "For now, you're under emergency protective custody of the state," Sheila explained gently. "However, I've been speaking with Bobby and Linda, who have expressed interest in serving as your temporary guardians." The couple exchanged glances, then Bobby stepped forward. "We've got the spare room already made up," he said gruffly, emotion making his voice rougher than usual. "If you'd be comfortable staying with us, that is." Jason looked between them, struggling to process this unexpected development. After years of neglect and abuse, the concept of adults genuinely wanting him in their home seemed almost incomprehensible. "What about Thunder?" he asked, his priorities clear. "That's more complicated," Sheila admitted. "Legally, he remains Mr. Blackwood's property, though Ms. Hayes is investigating the circumstances of his original sale." Thunder's legal status became the subject of intense debate over the following days. Eleanor Hayes, leveraging her newfound platform, published a detailed history of the Appaloosa's journey from Wyoming to Kansas. Her investigation revealed troubling irregularities in the chain of ownership. Most significantly, evidence that Thunder had originally been part of a protected herd whose sale was restricted by specific welfare clauses. Public opinion continued to solidify against Blackwood. Locals began visiting the fence line of Oak Ridge Farm daily, hoping to glimpse Jason and Thunder together. Some brought handmade signs of support, others left apples and carrots. Children drew pictures of the spotted horse and the boy with the harmonica, which Eleanor collected and displayed in a growing gallery on her blog. For Jason, the attention was both bewildering and uncomfortable. Having spent years trying to remain invisible, first to avoid his father's death, then to escape Roy's violence, the sudden spotlight felt exposing. Only with Thunder did he feel truly at ease, their quiet moments together a sanctuary from the circus developing around them. One morning, a week after the confrontation at the fence, Jason sat cross-legged in Thunder's paddock, reading aloud from Black Beauty. The Appaloosa grazed nearby, occasionally lifting his head to listen, ears swiveling toward Jason's voice. To anyone observing, it might have seemed the horse was simply eating grass, but Jason had learned to recognize the subtle signs of attention, the slight tilt of Thunder's head, the relaxed lower lip, the way his tail swished in rhythm with certain passages. "You understand, don't you?" Jason murmured, setting the book aside. "What it's like when people see you as just a thing they own." Thunder approached unhurriedly, lowering his muzzle to Jason's shoulder in what had become a familiar gesture of connection. The horse's breath was warm against the boy's neck, his presence solid and reassuring. In these quiet moments, Jason could almost forget the chaos surrounding them. The tranquil scene was interrupted by the arrival of Warren Blackwood, who approached the paddock fence with uncharacteristic caution. Thunder immediately sensed the man's presence, his head jerking up, muscles tensing visibly beneath his spotted coat. "Easy, boy," Jason whispered, rising slowly to position himself between the horse and Blackwood. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Blackwood said, raising his hand slightly. His usual commanding tone had been replaced by something more measured. "I wanted to discuss a proposal with you directly." Jason remained silent, one hand extended behind him to maintain contact with Thunder, who had retreated several steps but hadn't bolted. "The situation has become complicated," Blackwood continued, choosing his words carefully. "My PR team suggests a more formalized arrangement might benefit everyone involved." "You mean it would look good for you?" Jason replied, his young voice steady. A flicker of irritation crossed Blackwood's face before his public mask reasserted itself. "What I'm proposing is a legitimate position. You would work with Thunder and eventually other horses with similar issues. We'd call it the Thunder Rehabilitation Program, a specialized approach for traumatized horses." Jason's expression remained wary. "You said Thunder should be sent to slaughter. You hired Chester to break him." "Business decisions that I've reconsidered," Blackwood replied smoothly. "I recognize value when I see it, even if it takes unexpected forms. Your connection with that horse could be marketed as a specialty service, one that would command premium prices from owners of problem horses." The calculating nature of the offer hung in the air between them. Jason looked back at Thunder, who stood alert but no longer panicking, seemingly waiting for the boy's response. "I don't work with timers or deadlines," Jason said finally, turning back to Blackwood. "Each horse has their own time. You can't rush trust." Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, we could discuss the specifics later. For now, I simply wanted to express my admiration for your talents." As the wealthy rancher walked away, Linda appeared at the paddock gate, her expression concerned. "What did he want?" "To use us," Jason replied simply, returning to Thunder's side. The horse immediately lowered his head to the boy's level, as if offering reassurance. "But he doesn't understand that you can't buy what we have." That evening, as Jason helped Bobby with the evening feeding, the foreman received a call that made his weathered face darken with concern. "That was Sarah," he reported, pocketing his phone. "Blackwood's lawyer just served Eleanor with cease and desist papers. He's threatening to sue her for defamation if she continues publishing about Thunder." Jason's hands stilled on the feed bucket he was filling. "Can he do that?" "He's got the money for expensive lawyers," Bobby replied grimly. "Most folks would back down." "But Eleanor's not most folks," Linda added from the doorway, a determined smile on her face. "She called a meeting at the community center tonight. Says if Blackwood wants a fight, she'll give him one he never expected." While the cameras continued to capture each moment of the growing bond between Jason and Thunder, Blackwood murmured to his attorney away from the microphones, "Prepare the papers. As soon as this media circus dies down, we'll sell the horse to a buyer in Texas who doesn't care about its temperament and transfer the boy to another property. I won't allow a 13-year-old kid to make a fool of me on my own farm." The words hung in the air, settling like poison between the lawyer and Blackwood. Though spoken in hushed tones, they carried the weight of calculated cruelty, a decision made not from business sense, but wounded pride. As Blackwood's SUV pulled away from the farm, neither man noticed the stable hand pausing beside the hedgerow, a cell phone clutched in his trembling hand. He had heard everything. 2 days later, as dawn broke over Oak Ridge Farm, Jason sat beside Thunder in the quiet paddock. The morning ritual had become sacred to them both, Jason reading aloud from Black Beauty while the Appaloosa grazed nearby, his ears constantly pivoting to follow the boy's voice. Though appearing to focus on the sweet spring grass, Thunder never strayed more than a few yards from Jason, occasionally lifting his head to observe his young friend with liquid brown eyes that had gradually lost their wild terror. "I've been thinking about what Eleanor said," Jason murmured, setting the book aside. "About finding out where you came from." Thunder approached unhurriedly, lowering his head to snuffle curiously at Jason's pockets. The boy smiled, producing a carrot from his jacket. "Predictable, aren't I?" He laughed softly, offering the treat on his flat palm as his father had taught him. The horse's velvety lips delicately lifted the carrot, his breath warm against Jason's skin. These small moments of trust, Thunder willingly approaching, accepting food from his hand, standing calmly while Jason touched his scarred neck, represented victories more profound than any official training milestone Blackwood might recognize. At the main house, Eleanor Hayes sat before her laptop, her silver hair gathered in a practical bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. Around her, the kitchen table was buried beneath stacks of documents, breeding records, sales certificates, veterinary reports, the accumulated paper trail of Thunder's life before Oak Ridge Farm. "It's all here," she said without looking up as Marge entered with a pot of coffee. Thunder, or Midnight Storm as he was originally called, was born at Cloudwalker Sanctuary in Wyoming, a protected reservation for heritage breed horses. Their founding charter explicitly prohibits selling horses for rodeo or commercial exploitation. Marge poured 2 cups of the steaming coffee. "Then how did he end up in the rodeo circuit?" "That's the disturbing part," Eleanor replied, removing her glasses to rub her tired eyes. "The sanctuary's founder died 3 years ago. During the chaotic transition of leadership, several horses disappeared, officially listed as escaped or missing. Thunder was among them." "Stolen," Marge concluded flatly. "Effectively, yes. Then sold through a series of increasingly legitimate-seeming transactions until his history was sufficiently obscured. By the time Blackwood purchased him, the paper trail looked clean enough. But it wasn't. Not even close." Eleanor smiled grimly, tapping a document with her finger. "The sanctuary's charter includes a recovery clause. Any horse identified as originating from Cloudwalker must be returned if found being used commercially against their welfare guidelines. The implications hung between them, potent with possibility." Meanwhile, Sheila Reynolds sat in the county courthouse, methodically working through a different set of records. The social worker's expression remained professionally neutral, but her hand trembled slightly as she turned the pages of Michael Miller's last will and testament. "Ms. Reynolds?" The clerk appeared in the doorway. "I found those property records you requested." Sheila accepted the folder with a nod of thanks. Inside were the deeds and tax documents for a small property on the outskirts of Wichita. 10 acres with a modest house and stable that had belonged to Jason's father. According to the will, the property should have passed directly to Jason upon his father's death, held in trust until his 18th birthday. Instead, it had been illegally transferred to Roy Denton through a series of questionable documents bearing what appeared to be forged signatures. "Oh, Michael," Sheila murmured, touching the signature on the will, a signature she remembered from years ago when the renowned horse trainer had occasionally consulted on abuse cases involving equines. "Your son should have been protected." By mid-morning, the daily crowd of supporters had gathered at Oak Ridge Farm's fence line. What had begun as a handful of curious locals had swelled to dozens of regular visitors, retirees bringing lawn chairs, mothers with children clutching hand-drawn pictures, teenagers posting live updates to social media. They came to glimpse what many now called the miracle of Thunder, a traumatized horse finding healing through the patience of an equally wounded boy. Bobby watched the gathering with mixed emotions from the shadow of the equipment barn. The public attention brought protection through visibility, but it also meant constant scrutiny of the farm's operations. Every employee now worked under the assumption that their actions might be photographed, recorded, or reported. "Mr. Jenkins?" Bobby turned to find a young stable hand, Kevin, recently hired to muck stalls, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "What is it, Kevin?" I heard something yesterday." The young man glanced around before continuing in a hushed voice. "Mr. Blackwood and his lawyer. They were talking by the car and I was trimming the hedge. They didn't see me." As Kevin recounted the conversation he'd overheard, Bobby's weathered face darkened. The plan to sell Thunder secretly once media attention died down to transfer Jason away. It confirmed their worst suspicions about Blackwood's public conversion. "You did right telling me," Bobby said finally. "Not a word to anyone else for now." Kevin nodded, relief evident in his young face. "I couldn't let it happen, sir. Not after seeing how that horse looks at the kid, like he's the whole world." In the paddock beside Bobby's cottage, Jason had progressed to something that might have looked like training to an untrained eye. In reality, it was more of a conversation. Jason moving slowly around the enclosure, Thunder following at a respectful distance, both hyper-aware of the other's body language. When Jason stopped, Thunder stopped. When Jason turned, Thunder mirrored the movement with almost balletic precision. No ropes connected them. No commands were issued. There was only the invisible thread of trust, strengthening with each shared moment. Sarah Jenkins, the veterinarian, leaned on the fence watching, her professional curiosity piqued by the unconventional methods. "It's remarkable," she commented as Bobby joined her. "In traditional training, we establish dominance first. Make the horse yield to pressure, respect boundaries. Jason's doing the opposite. He's yielding to Thunder, respecting his space, allowing him to set the pace." "Michael trained the same way," Bobby replied, a note of reverence in his voice. "Said most trainers get it backward. They try to teach the horse to trust them without first proving they're trustworthy." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The results speak for themselves. Thunder's infection is clearing up, his muscle tone is improving, and his stress behaviors are significantly reduced." She glanced at Bobby. "But none of that matters if Blackwood sells him out from under us." Bobby's jaw tightened. "We might have a problem there." Later that afternoon, the key players in what local media had dubbed the Thunder situation gathered in Bobby and Linda's living room. Eleanor spread her research across the coffee table while Sheila added her own discoveries to the growing collection. Jason sat quietly in the corner, absorbing the adults' conversation with the hypervigilance of a child accustomed to having important decisions made without his input. "So we have two separate legal angles," Eleanor summarized. "The sanctuary's recovery clause that could invalidate Blackwood's ownership of Thunder and the improper transfer of Jason's inheritance property. Both would require court challenges," Sheila cautioned, "which means lawyers, filing fees, and potentially months of litigation. And Blackwood has deeper pockets than all of us combined," Bobby added grimly. "Maybe it's not about outspending him." Jason's quiet voice drew everyone's attention. "Maybe it's about making it too expensive for him to fight." The adults exchanged surprised glances. "What do you mean?" Linda asked gently. Jason leaned forward, his young face serious beyond his years. "Blackwood cares about his reputation and his business. If fighting us publicly costs more than just letting Thunder go, wouldn't he choose the cheaper option?" A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. "Out of the mouths of babes," she murmured. "The boy's right. This isn't just a legal battle. It's a public relations war. And Warren Blackwood is losing badly in the court of public opinion." The strategy that emerged combined legal leverage with public pressure. Eleanor would continue documenting Thunder's rehabilitation through her increasingly popular blog, emphasizing the horse's origin at the sanctuary and Jason's rightful inheritance. Sheila would formally challenge the property transfer through official channels, while Sarah compiled medical evidence of Thunder's mistreatment under Chester's brief tenure. As evening approached, Jason returned to Thunder's paddock for their sunset ritual. The Appaloosa greeted him with a soft nicker, approaching the gate before Jason even called. This simple action, Thunder voluntarily seeking human contact, represented a transformation that Blackwood's expensive trainers had deemed impossible. "We're going to fix things," Jason promised, resting his forehead against Thunder's muscular neck. "I don't know how yet, but we will." The horse stood perfectly still, allowing the contact that would have triggered violent panic mere weeks before. Something in the animal's posture suggested not just tolerance, but active comfort in Jason's presence, as though the boy's touch eased some persistent pain that ran deeper than physical wounds. The following morning arrived with unexpected visitors to Oak Ridge Farm. Eleanor Hayes led a small delegation through the main gate, her silver hair gleaming in the early sunlight, her posture radiating quiet authority. Beside her walked a tall, dignified indigenous man wearing a bolo tie and western jacket, his long gray hair gathered in a neat braid. "That's Joseph Cloudwalker," Marge whispered to Jason as they watched from Thunder's paddock, grandson of the sanctuary's founder. Blackwood emerged from the main house, his usual confident stride faltering slightly at the sight of the delegation. Behind him, his lawyer hurried to keep pace, briefcase clutched like a shield. "Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor called, her voice carrying clearly across the manicured lawn. We'd like a word about Thunder's true origins and Jason Miller's stolen inheritance." The confrontation that followed took place in Blackwood's opulent office, away from prying eyes, but its effects reverberated throughout the farm. Staff gathered in small clusters, speculating in hushed tones about the raised voices occasionally audible through closed doors. Supporters at the fence line swelled in number as word spread through social media that something significant was happening. When the office door finally opened 3 hours later, Joseph Cloudwalker emerged first, his expression impassive, but his eyes glinting with satisfaction. Eleanor followed, then Sheila, both women maintaining professional composure, despite the obvious tension. Blackwood appeared last, his face flushed with a complex mixture of anger and calculation. For a man accustomed to controlling every situation through money or intimidation, being cornered by legal and ethical claims represented unfamiliar territory. The group proceeded directly to Thunder's paddock, where Jason waited beside the Appaloosa. The horse tensed at the approach of so many strangers, pressing close to the boy's side in a gesture that spoke volumes about their reversed dynamic. Now it was Thunder seeking protection from Jason. "Young man," Joseph Cloudwalker addressed Jason directly, his deep voice gentle. "I've heard much about your connection with this horse. Would you show me?" Without words, Jason demonstrated the relationship they'd built. A subtle gesture sent Thunder circling the paddock at an easy trot. Another brought him back to stand calmly beside Jason. No ropes, no commands, just mutual understanding. Cloudwalker nodded slowly, emotion briefly breaking through his composed exterior. "My grandfather believed horses choose their people," he said. "It appears this one has chosen." With that simple statement, the path forward crystallized. Eleanor stepped forward, holding a folder of documents. "Mr. Blackwood, these are the papers that prove Thunder's illegal sale, along with the deed to the property legally belonging to Jason Miller. You have two options. We can resolve this civilly now, or we can let the courts and media decide who's really stealing from whom." The tension in the air was palpable as Eleanor held the folder steady, her eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. For a moment, the only sound was Thunder's soft breathing and the distant calls of meadowlarks from the surrounding fields. The wealthy rancher's expression shifted through a cascade of emotions: disbelief, anger, calculation, and finally, reluctant acceptance of his untenable position. "This is absurd," Blackwood finally said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "You can't possibly expect me to simply hand over a $100,000 investment based on some questionable paperwork and emotional appeals." Joseph Cloudwalker stepped forward, his weathered face solemn. "The Appaloosa you call Thunder carries bloodlines preserved by my family for 7 generations. His mother was Spirit Dancer, his grandmother was Moonshadow, horses that were never meant to be sold, never meant to be broken for profit. The law may speak in terms of property and ownership, Mr. Blackwood, but there are older laws at work here." Blackwood's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, pointing at specific sections of the documents Eleanor had presented. The rancher's face darkened as he listened, the reality of his situation becoming increasingly clear. "I need time to review these claims with my legal team," he finally announced, straightening his custom belt buckle in a gesture of attempted authority. "Of course," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Meanwhile, shall we discuss this with the reporters currently gathered at your front gate? I believe there's a crew from Kansas City among them now." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Blackwood's gaze shifted to the main entrance where, indeed, the daily crowd of supporters had been joined by additional media vehicles, their satellite dishes gleaming in the morning sun. 3 days later, in a conference room smelling of leather and expensive cologne, the fate of Thunder and Jason was determined through intense negotiations. Blackwood, flanked by 3 attorneys, sat across from Eleanor, Sheila, and Joseph Cloudwalker. Bobby represented Oak Ridge Farms' staff interests, while Sarah Jenkins provided expert testimony on Thunder's physical and psychological condition. Jason waited outside with Linda, absently playing his harmonica while Thunder grazed in a nearby paddock, both seemingly unaware that their futures were being decided behind closed doors. "The settlement agreement is complex but fair," Sheila explained to Jason afterward, kneeling to meet his eyes directly. Thunder will be transferred to your care on the property your father left you. Bobby and Linda will serve as your legal guardians until you turn 18, living with you on that property. Jason absorbed this information slowly, his young mind struggling to process such a monumental shift in fortune. And Blackwood agrees to all this? Not willingly, Bobby admitted with a wry smile. But Eleanor made him understand that fighting would cost more than conceding, in dollars and reputation. What none of them mentioned to Jason was the bitter pill Blackwood had been forced to swallow, a clause that allowed him to publicly position himself as the architect of this happy ending. In exchange for avoiding litigation and negative publicity, Blackwood would be permitted to present the transfer as his own benevolent decision, a carefully crafted narrative of a businessman with a heart of gold recognizing the special bond between boy and horse. "There's more," Eleanor added, her eyes twinkling with triumph. "Part of Oak Ridge Farm will be designated as a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses, using the methods you've pioneered with Thunder. You'll serve as a consultant when you're not in school." Jason's gaze drifted to Thunder, who had lifted his head as if sensing the momentous conversation. "He'll really be safe? Forever?" "Yes," Joseph Cloudwalker confirmed, his deep voice gentle. "And when you're both ready, you'll be welcome to visit the sanctuary where his ancestors ran free." 2 weeks later, a small procession of vehicles wound its way along a dusty country road. Leading the convoy was Bobby's pickup truck, with Jason in the passenger seat, his face pressed against the window watching the familiar landscape roll by. Behind them came a specialized horse trailer carrying Thunder, driven by Sarah with Marge riding shotgun to keep the Appaloosa calm during his journey. "Almost there," Bobby said, turning onto a narrower lane bordered by ancient oak trees. Jason nodded silently, emotion tightening his throat as the property came into view. Though he hadn't seen it since his father's death 3 years earlier, memories flooded back with each familiar landmark: the weathered red barn with its sagging roof, the modest white farmhouse surrounded by untended flower beds, the old wooden fence encircling 10 acres of prime Kansas pastureland. "Home," he whispered, the word feeling strange on his tongue after so long without a place to claim as his own. As the vehicles parked in the gravel driveway, Jason noticed unexpected additions to the welcoming committee. Eleanor stood on the porch beside Linda, who had driven ahead to prepare the house. But they weren't alone. At least 24 people from Clearwater had gathered, bearing casserole dishes, toolboxes, and welcoming smiles. "Word got around that you were moving in today," Eleanor explained as Jason approached, overwhelmed by the turnout. "These good folks thought you might appreciate some help getting settled." For the next several hours, the property hummed with activity. Men replaced broken fence rails and repaired the barn door that had hung askew since a storm the previous winter. Women cleaned the farmhouse's dusty interior and filled its refrigerator with home-cooked meals. Teenagers cleared weeds from the long-neglected garden, while children laughed and played in the yard. Through it all, Thunder remained in his trailer, the doors open, but the ramp still raised. Sarah had advised letting him acclimate gradually to the sounds and scents of his new home before introducing the additional stress of unfamiliar surroundings. As sunset approached and the impromptu work crew began to depart, Jason finally approached the trailer. Thunder nickered softly in recognition, his intelligent eyes following the boy's movements. "Ready to see our new home?" Jason asked quietly, lowering the ramp. With characteristic patience, he simply waited at the bottom, harmonica in hand, playing the melody that had become their private language. After several minutes, Thunder cautiously descended, his hooves making hollow sounds against the metal ramp. At the bottom, he paused, nostrils flaring as he processed the complex tapestry of scents: fresh-cut wood, newly turned earth, distant cattle, and the lingering presence of many humans. Jason didn't rush him, didn't pull or prod. He simply continued playing, gradually walking backward toward the barn, allowing Thunder to follow at his own pace. The remaining adults watched in respectful silence as boy and horse made their way across the property, performing an unhurried dance of trust that spoke more eloquently than words. Michael would be proud, Bobby murmured to Linda, his voice rough with emotion. So damn proud. That night, Jason slept in his childhood bedroom for the first time in 3 years. Linda had found fresh linens, and someone had thoughtfully placed a vase of wildflowers on the nightstand. Through the open window came the soft sounds of thunder in his new paddock, occasional hoof beats and gentle snorts that reassured Jason of the horse's presence. In the days that followed, a new routine established itself. Bobby commuted between Oak Ridge Farm and the Miller property, overseeing operations at both locations. Linda took charge of Jason's delayed education, working with the local school district to develop a program that would allow him to catch up on the years of schooling he'd missed during his mother's decline and Roy's reign of terror. Thunder's rehabilitation continued at a natural pace, free from arbitrary deadlines or commercial pressures. Each day revealed new progress. The horse now approached the fence when he saw Jason coming, accepted grooming without tension, and had begun to tolerate the presence of others when the boy was nearby. A month after the move, Warren Blackwood made his first and only visit to the property. His arrival in a luxury SUV drew immediate reaction from Thunder, who retreated to the far corner of his paddock, head high and nostrils flared in recognition of a threat his human companions couldn't perceive. "I came to see how my investment is performing," Blackwood announced, attempting to maintain the fiction that the entire arrangement had been his benevolent idea. Jason, now more confident in his position, met the man's gaze directly. "He's not an investment anymore. He's healing." The brief, uncomfortable tour that followed revealed the transformation of both the property and its inhabitants. The farmhouse gleamed with fresh paint. The barn had been structurally reinforced, and several new paddocks had been constructed in anticipation of additional rescue horses. "The first official rehabilitation case arrives next week," Eleanor explained, having joined them for the inspection. "A former racing thoroughbred with severe anxiety. The owner contacted us after reading about Thunder's progress." Blackwood nodded stiffly, his expression unreadable. Before leaving, he paused at Thunder's paddock, watching as the Appaloosa deliberately moved to stand beside Jason, the horse's body language clearly communicating his choice of allegiance. "You've done well," Blackwood admitted reluctantly, his gaze fixed on Thunder's gleaming coat and clear eyes. "Perhaps there's something to your methods after all." As the seasons changed, so too did the small farm. What began as Jason and Thunder's personal sanctuary gradually evolved into what local media dubbed the Thunder Program. Sarah developed specialized veterinary protocols for abused horses, incorporating Jason's insights about behavioral cues and trauma responses. Marge contributed traditional Cherokee knowledge about equine healing practices, teaching Jason herbs and remedies passed down through generations. Eleanor's documentation of Thunder's journey became the foundation for an educational program that brought school children to the farm, teaching empathy and animal welfare through direct experience. The most troubled youth, those with histories similar to Jason's, often connected most profoundly with the recovering horses, creating healing partnerships that benefited both species. 5 years passed like the changing Kansas seasons, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle, but always moving forward. Jason, now 18 and preparing to begin veterinary studies at the University of Kansas, stood in the center of the main paddock surrounded by a film crew from a national documentary series. "People always ask how I managed to tame Thunder," he explained to the interviewer, gesturing toward the magnificent Appaloosa grazing nearby. No longer did Thunder bear the haunted look of a traumatized animal. His coat gleamed with health, his movements displayed confidence, and the scar beneath his mane had faded to a barely visible line. "The truth is, I never tamed him," Jason continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority of earned wisdom. "We healed each other. Horses don't need to be broken, just like people don't. Sometimes all we need is someone who understands our pain without trying to force a quick fix." Later that afternoon, after the film crew had packed their equipment and departed, Jason approached Thunder with an unusual request. For the first time in their long partnership, he removed all equipment, no halter, no lead rope, nothing that suggested control or containment. "What do you say, old friend?" he asked softly. Just once, like we used to dream about. With practiced ease, Jason vaulted onto Thunder's bare back, the movement so fluid it seemed choreographed. For a heartbeat, horse and rider remained motionless, a living statue silhouetted against the golden Kansas sunset. Then, with nothing but the lightest pressure of knees and the faintest whispered encouragement, they were off, racing across the open pasture at a full gallop, two spirits moving as one. From the farmhouse porch, visitors to the rehabilitation center watched in awe as Jason and Thunder disappeared into the distance, the harmonious sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the gathering dusk. No saddles, no bridles, no constraints, just mutual trust uniting a boy who had found his purpose and a horse who had rediscovered his natural nobility. Two broken spirits who, together, had found a freedom neither could have achieved alone.